Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special behind the scenes video. I just thought it would be interesting to record some voiceover to kind of give you a little information about what we're working on today. So, we're working on some storyboards for a new short film that I'm working on. As I'm recording this, I've literally just drawn up the storyboards. This is not being recorded in like a super deep retrospective. I haven't filmed anything. I'm probably only going to release this video after the movie's been filmed. But as of the recording of this video, this is literally just after drawing out the storyboards. And I wanted to kind of talk through some of my creative decisions, why I think storyboards are important, even if I'm not the best artist and even if I'm drawing very rough versions of the scenes. And I guess I just want this to kind of be a lesson because this is something that I've really learned to appreciate as a part of my process. And I think that if there's any young filmmakers out there watching this, who are looking for inspiration, or who just want to kind of talk about the process of filmmaking, I think there's a lot of steps in pre-production that are not that are worth not overlooking. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Storyboarding, I think, is a great process, even for films that don't super require it. Even just to know that you're going into a scene with a plan, and even if it's like it doesn't even have to be the point is not to stick to the plan, but the point is just to have a part. How do I put this? To give yourself a creative process where it gives you a reason to think more deeply about the way that you want to film the scene. That's why I do storyboards. It's not even for the purpose of the storyboards themselves necessarily, but it is to give myself a reason to immerse myself in the scene, draw things out, think about, oh, like, do I want a character facing a certain way? How do I want the blocking? Even if it's just small things, right? Like you can see in these storyboards, even in very simple terms, I've started to figure out the blocking and who do I want on certain sides. Um, what way do I want them facing? The kind of general direction of the scene. What different angles look like? And like I said, it's very basic and it's hardly three dimensional, but there is, I think, a lot of value in that. It's the kind of stuff that like I'm happy changing that stuff on set. I'm happy being on location and looking at angles and shots and going, you know what? I was really thinking it would go, wide, medium, close, and I was thinking it would kind of look like that. But really, now that I'm here, I realize we don't really need the close or the wide or whatever it is, right? Like those are decisions you can make in the moment on set. And I don't do storyboards so that I don't make those decisions later. I do storyboards just to have a reason to think about blocking and think about direction, think about the scene, think about the emotion of the scene, and just to think about like I guess like this is really the art of filmmaking. If there's something that puts filmmaking beyond just a sum of its parts, I think it is the art form of using editing between different angles and shots and blocking and putting that, using that to tell a story, to show some kind of emotion. It's not just being able to directing actors to show their emotions, even though that's part of it. And it's not just being able to work with composers or, for me, I compose my own music, right? So it's not just that, but it's this process of like literally putting a film together in such a way that also tells a story. And is there a way to do that through blocking? And I don't want to sound too pretentious because I want to be humble about it because my storyboards here are really rough and what you're looking at is very rough. And I think there's a lot of ways in which like the cinematic storytelling language is something that like I feel like I'm still only dipping my toes into. And I don't want you to worry too much about that. Like if you're a beginner filmmaker, I don't want you to be intimidated by quote unquote the cinematic language. And there's some things that's just like when it comes down to it, sometimes you just have to turn your camera on and just start telling your story. Don't worry about all the pretentiousness. But there is power in thinking about the language, thinking about, how you use your directions, thinking about what's large in the frame. Is there a character that's larger in the frame? Thinking about that story that you can tell through those decisions and the angles and how how you prepare these scenes. Like those are all ways in which you can help tell your story. And I feel like, like I said, I feel like I'm barely scratching the surface with my own knowledge of that language. But I guess I want to encourage you. It's like, there's so many things I think in filmmaking that's like, there's so many things you can learn that will benefit the craft. But I also kind of believe that, like, if it's ever too daunting, don't let it get in the way of you telling your story. Because ultimately, if you can tell your story in the way that you want to tell it, even if you're not worried about craft, if there's if you can kind of remove barriers and just let yourself figure out that story, I feel like there's a lot of things that will come into, kind of fall into place because you're tapped into the emotion of it. And so, like, if craft is ever daunting, don't worry about craft. It'll come if you're emotionally honest. Because that's what craft is, right? Is, finding technical ways to show your emotional honesty. I don't know. That's kind of one definition of it. I mean, there's a lot of different definitions of craft, but I kind of think, the point of thinking about the technical side of filmmaking and craft is so that you can be more in tune with your most authentic voice. I don't know. I feel like this is all snobby and pretentious, but I guess, like, I want the point of this voiceover to not be snobby, to show that, like, as long as, like, you're gonna make your best work if you are in tune with your vision and just finding a process that allows you to be the most in tune with it. Find a way to remove distractions, find a way to not be worried about things on set. And for me, storyboarding is part of that process for me, is finding a way to prepare and think about things early so that I'm on set and I've already thought through things and I have answers. And it's like, through these storyboards, this is gonna give me a jump start into the editing process. I've recorded, like, a voiceover of myself just kind of reading through the script, and I'm very excited to now use these storyboards that I've drawn up and edit that with the voiceover, and that might teach me things about the film that I wouldn't have known just from looking at the script, writing the script, reading the script. There's things that you just really don't realize about your film, I think, until it becomes a film, right, in some way. And I think previs is the first step of it actually being a film. Even though, like, the script writing process is obviously, like, those are the first steps, right? And all the things that go into writing. But I really think that there's things you just, it's still a different medium. The writing medium is different from the film medium. And I kind of feel like previs, especially with visuals and audio put together, like, that's what a film is. And when you start to move it beyond writing and into that, that's when you may realize, oh, this felt different on the page and feels different um, in motion, right? Or with visual and audio, it feels different now that I'm seeing it play out in time. Now that I'm hearing the performances, I'm hearing the words, they sound different than the way I read them. And that's part of the process. That's part of the filmmaking process. And that's really why I value previs, is just to already have some informed idea of, like, oh, I know what it's going to sound like before I actually have it be performed. Um, and this is the kind of thing, it's like, I don't worry about this with every script. And there's some things that just aren't worth worrying about previs and storyboards if it's just a small scene, or if your vision is clear enough that you're like, I know that. I know how this is going to play out. I don't need to worry about it. Um, but this is the kind of short film where it's like, I wanted to go ahead and be thinking about the pacing, the music, some things I could edit with, and, like, being able to figure out the timing of things, even if it's not a super visual, like, technically, what am I trying to say? As far as the technical elements, the visuals aren't super technical. So storyboards are not really helping solve technical problems, which is why they're so rough, right? It's because, like, oh, I'm not really trying to solve technical problems there. Even though, like I said, I was figuring out the blocking and the angles, and that's all an important part of the process. Really, the point of storyboards and the value of it is from being able to put it all together, have something where I can now see the film, and that can teach me something else about what I'm making. Because I guess that's part of the artistic process. I don't know, like I said, I'm not trying to sound snobby, but I do want to talk about the artistic process. So maybe it's just going to sound snobby whenever you talk about it. I'm still not used to it, um, even now after all these years. But yeah, I mean, it's just, I do think our art is very much a discovery process, right? And I think sometimes we want to talk about art and film directing as if it's like, oh, this person has a vision. It was clear. They had a map in their head, and now they just had to figure out a way to follow that map to find the treasure, basically, right? And sometimes it's like you have a vision that you can really follow, and sometimes it feels like that. You're like, oh, how do I pull that out of my head and bring it onto the screen? But often I feel like filmmaking is much more, at least for me, and I don't know, maybe this makes me less of a director, but for me, I feel like it's very much a discovery process, and you may have your vision and that can guide you, but really the process of filmmaking is, and maybe I think this is tied into the reason that I make art and make films, is to have an excuse to discover things about my vision, to figure out like, I think I have something to say about this topic or this kind of story, this question. And the filmmaking process is not a way for me to just voice what I have to say. The process allows me to discover what I have to say through the filmmaking process, through writing the script and figuring out all those questions. It's a way of asking questions, not providing answers. To me, that's really what filmmaking is about. And it gives me a reason to approach material that I care about, examine it, and then come up with answers. And that's really, I think, what I love about the filmmaking process. So it's like, even if there's all these steps I can take to gain confidence in the project, there's a point where it's like fundamentally, it's like the confidence will be gained once I've made it. And there's some things that are just unknown until then. And that's the process. I don't know. I think sometimes, when we're discussing creativity, that aspect of it isn't necessarily discussed a whole lot. The fact that you have to discover what you're making as you're making it. And it's something that could be different and it's shaped by so many different things. Even if you feel like your vision is so clear, the fact is like you have to figure out as you're making it what it is that you're making it, what it is that you're making. Um, and I don't know. I do think that that's a part of the I don't know, not to get into it, but I think that is part of the issue with Hollywood is it's hard to present that to investors, all those unknowns, right? The fact that creative process is full of unknowns, and it should be. And I think you're at your best when there's unknowns. Because I guess like I guess I think about like, am I lacking as a director because there are unknowns? Is my vision unclear? Is that something to be ashamed of? And I don't know. I think part of the joy of creativity and the creative process is the fact that um like the creative process at its best means you're figuring things out, and if you rush to find answers and rush to find a vision and clarify your vision, you're going to end up settling on decisions. You're going to end up just settling on, well, I want a vision, I want things to be clear, so I'm going to make this decision and make it quick. And then you're going to end up making something you don't want to make. But I think when you can, kind of relish in the creative process and say, you know what, I don't know the answer to those questions yet. My vision, I have a vision, but there's things that are not yet clear, and I don't want to rush to make a decision. I want to figure things out. I want to ask questions, come back to it, and only make a decision when it's informed, creatively informed by figuring out what is my point of view, what is my perspective, analyzing that, and then coming back to and making a decision when that's, when you've analyzed it. After all of that, that's when you can make a decision. But it takes time, and that takes time. And even if you have such a strong vision, the process of writing a script, at least for me, is something that can take a long time just because it's figuring out that process and figuring out, well, it's like I could like rush into a decision. I could say, yeah, this is the story I want to tell. How do I tell it? And it's like, wait a minute. Like maybe I need to write a script, and I might like this happened for this script that I'm storyboarding right now. I had this whole process where I had some previous outlines, and I was like, this seems right. This seems like the project I want to make. But then I started writing the script, and the script was not inspiring me. The outlines were interesting. There were things about the outlines that were very interesting to me. I liked the premise. But as I was telling the story, I realized that what was most interesting to me about it, even though the outlines had it, the outlines had, like, they really gripped me as I was actually writing the script. The most interesting thing was happening off screen. It wasn't even on the page. It wasn't making it to the page. And I had to just re-examine the story I wanted to tell and figure out, you know, what exactly do I want to say? And I guess just to be specific, just to be very specific about it. Because I'm sure as of the time that this video comes out, you'll have already seen the short film, and it is the story of this pastor who was obsessed with the end times, and his obsession destroys him, right? This and it's a story too about like the fact that in the beginning people listen to that, and that there's very much a corrupting obsession. And being a pastor is something that can come from a lot of like a desire to be in touch with God and help your congregation be in touch with God, right? That can come from a great place. Um, but how can that also be manipulated and corrupted when your own obsessions and your own, quote unquote, your own demons corrupt that? When your own pride gets in the way or anything else you're working through, that can change your interpretation of scripture, that can change, you know, the way that you conduct things, when that felt selfishness gets in the way. And sometimes it's hard to spot that until it's too late. And that's kind of what the story's about. But that was really only the backstory of a previous draft. That was something that in my first drafts, it was one character, and he was not the main character. It was really focused on another character. And this was the villain, right? This was the story for this kind of cult leader, right? And I just realized that I was like, that's not just backstory that, it's too interesting to just be backstory, and the backstory is hardly making it into the script. As it happened, that was the most interesting part of the script for me, and I needed to focus on that because, that's where I had things to say, and I've realized that, like, those religious themes, like, I'm passionate about a lot of that stuff, and I'm passionate about, like, figuring out, I guess, like, examining those questions and maybe kind of helping show that, like, what that where does that corruption come from, and kind of asking those questions about, like, these pastors who can be corrupted by these feelings. I was passionate about telling that story, and showing how the Bible itself could be misinterpreted based on your own selfishness and pride. That's a story I was interested in. Um, and I was passionate about that. So I was like, I need to really follow my passions. And I realized that over the course of several projects. I did a musical earlier in 2023, um, where it was the story of Jesus's temptations in the wilderness. And I never really approached religious material like that before. But it's just I've realized that, like, that is one of my passions, and I want to pursue that. It's not because I have an agenda, and it's not to I guess, like, it is to share a message because I feel like I have something to say, and I wanna I wanna voice that. I wanna share my perspective, my point of view. But it's not with any agenda there, you know? And it's not to try to, like, find, like, the Christian audience and try to do something with that, right? And I don't know, I'm not trying to, like, um, find some kind of magnet for, like, tapping into an audience. I'm just trying to express what I have to express, find what I'm passionate about, and tell stories about that. And if I can examine everything that I think and believe and care about, religion is one of those things that I care about. Um, and I'm interested to see kind of what other projects result from that, because this could be just one of many more to come, or maybe something where it's like, okay, I've expressed what I have to say about religious themes for a while. Now I want to go back to sci-fi for a second, right? Well, sci-fi is something I care about as well and have a point of view on. There's so many different genres I care about, and and I don't know. I think that's just part of storytelling, is that you can, your perspective can take many forms, and it can show up in different genres. And I want to encourage anyone watching, um, who's maybe trying to figure out what they have to say, or figuring out what they can write about, and figure out the filmmaking process, and you know kind of just decide what project they want to do. I don't know. I've talked to several people who are super creative and super talented, who want to get into creating things. And I talk to them, and it seems to me that what's stopping them from making films isn't the fact that, they don't know the process or what to do or how to get started, but it's deciding what they care about and what project to focus that all on. Because, it's like they can imagine themselves doing the storyboarding, doing the writing, doing the filming, doing even the acting, and they can put it all together and edit it. But the question is, what project is deserving of all that attention? And I guess I just want to encourage you to figure out, like, I mean, there's so many different ways that can take place, and it doesn't have to be just one project. You don't have to find one project that fits checks every single box. But you do have to find something you care about and kind of figure out what that looks like, and that can take a lot of different forms. And you don't have to cram it all into one project. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say. Not to settle when you're figuring out what project to do, but just to be aware that, like, one project is not going to check every single box, because I have so much to express through different mediums. like I said, like I've done musicals before, and that's a medium where I feel like I have a lot to express. But not every project I do should be a musical, right? It doesn't make sense for every story that I want to tell, even though that's a medium that I really enjoy working in, and I think shows off a lot of strengths. I'm a musician and I really enjoy composing, and I enjoy singing, and I think I have like things to offer in all of those departments as a musician, as a writer, as a singer. Those are all things I enjoy, and I like to share all of those things, but it doesn't make sense for every project. Animation is something that's fun. Just literally the medium itself is something I enjoy, and but not every project necessitates that. And figuring out the difference between live action and animation, and I've enjoyed kind of doing different projects that use different degrees of that, experimenting with CG, and I'm excited to get into that for this project as well. Because there's of course a scene at the end where I'm figuring out this chase, and it's responding basically to a I don't know, just like to be very um upfront about it is like, when I decide what film I want to make next, often it's iterating on past concepts that I've tried before and just want to go further with. If you're ever asking what informs my next project, there's so many things. There's things that constantly inspire me, and there's so many stories I always want to tell. But one of the things that also guides my creative process in the beginning is looking at my past work and just figuring out, what am I proud of? What do I want to push further? And if I'm thinking, ooh, I like this about this project, but I know I could do this thing better now, then what guides future projects is figuring that out and going, oh, because I can do that better now, I'm going to do a new project where I can show off how much I've learned, where I can show that I can do it better. And so, there's a car chase at the in the beginning of Night Terror. That was a short film I made in the fall of 2022, I think. And I was really proud of that film. And kind of what's inspired this film is really iterating from Night Terror and kind of figuring out some of those themes thematically. The story of, a powerful man who was corrupted by his power. I mean, that's the essence of both stories, even though there's very different undertones and different I mean, the details are different, right? But I mean, those themes are the same. And from a storytelling perspective, it's both stories about like where the protagonist is not a good guy, right? And you're following this character who's a tragic character who falls from grace, right? Who you can't always root for. And maybe you want to root for, but you can see, because you can see their good intentions here and there. They're trying so hard to be in touch with figuring out what is the right thing, how can they inspire people. But at the end, they're corrupted by either their greed or their pride or both, right, in different ways. And so Night Terror and this film, both tackle those ideas. Um, but so it kind of made sense to like I was like I want to tackle all that again, but show that I can make a better movie. I want to tackle a car chase, but do it better now. Show everything I've learned since then, um, with you know with editing, with visual effects, with actually filming more elements. And I had a lot of CG and digi doubles in Night Terror, and I think in retrospect they were a little distracting. So I want to incorporate more live action elements through a CG car chase scene like that. So I'm excited to really get into that and bring that to life and just figure out what that looks like. And ultimately, if it does look better, we'll see. Maybe it'll look better, maybe it'll look worse. Who knows? That's just part of the process. But I want an excuse to revisit some of that material and do it better and do it in a new way. Um, and so those are all parts of the process that inspire me. So I'm excited to bring this film to life. I mean, I'm excited to work with some new actors and put it all together. And I do think it'll be better. And I guess like, how do you articulate how a film is going to be better? There's a point where it's hard to, but um, I guess like with that all in mind too, just like I want to encourage anyone watching, if you're interested, if you're watching this far, that means you're interested in behind the scenes material. Maybe you're a filmmaker yourself, I assume. And I guess I want to encourage you that to have a growth mindset, to look at each film you do, and even if it's something you are really proud of, even if it's something you're happy with it as is, to always be asking questions of, well, how can I make the next thing better? How can I learn from that? How can I do more? And it doesn't always necessarily mean that you're doing more with more. Sometimes you're doing more with less, or you're just figuring out how to use your resources more effectively. And so I guess I want to encourage y'all that like, leveling up It doesn't always necessarily mean getting a bigger crew, getting bigger tech, right? More equipment. Sometimes it just means, how can I be a better artist? How can I make sure that my next project is more in touch with my creative goals, right? If there's a story I want to tell, an emotion I want to convey, all those things, right? If there's any way that I want to help show the audience just my vision, how can I make sure that I'm more in touch with that and more able to do that? And it's talent. Talent is separate from, yeah, it's not completely separate from the technical side. It very much informs the technical side and manifests all through the craft and the technical side of the craft. Um, but talent is also something that's like, regardless of how big your equipment is, you can still show that you're a talented director and filmmaker. You know, if you can be in touch with your vision, that can manifest through the cinematography, through the editing, and, even without great equipment, you can still show those things. Now, of course, there's also things with equipment like lighting and sets and wardrobe and props and all these things and visual effects that can level up when you have more resources and or funding or whatever it is. But I really feel like the fundamentals of what makes an engaging film are accessible for anyone, and I hope that that's encouraging as well. No matter what camera you're filming on, no matter who you're filming with, especially just the art of acting, right? That's something that is just human. So as long as you're working with humans, they are capable of being great actors. If they have talent, or and talent means different things. And maybe this is a whole different discussion. I don't necessarily want to get into that, but talent is not just natural talent, not just gifted people, but attained talent. Talent that you work for, that you practice, that is all part of talent as well. So when I use the word talent, I'm also referring to the work that you put in to get better, the practice, and informed practice, um, and everything that does to increase your skill. Um, and I think that that's a discussion that, especially with adults, most people are aware of. But I guess I just remember, especially being a kid, and you haven't had that many opportunities to practice and figure out like how to get better at things. And you have, and you've seen that, oh, you didn't know how to ride a bike. Now you can put in a little practice and be able to ride a bike. So there are a lot of things that you go from zero to, capable with as a kid. But I think there's also things that, just because of a lack of life experience, I think there is a question of how much of talent is just natural and how much do you work at it. And sometimes that answer is not as obvious when you're a kid, because there are some things that just came easy to you. And then, you haven't, like, years haven't gone by where you've tried to get better. I mean, every kid has a different level of experience there. I don't want to talk for everyone, but I do think, especially as more and more people grow up, I feel like it becomes more obvious. At least to me, it's become more obvious that so much of skill, it's not just what's natural. It's things you have to work on. And even if you have a natural skill level, you have to practice and work on preserving it and making it better, even when things are natural. I guess that's the great thing about filmmaking, is I think at its best, it's figuring out how to tap into a process to make the process of filmmaking more natural for you. How to most naturally go from, oh, I have this idea, I have this vision. How can I make sure that actors know what that is? And how can I communicate that, put it on screen, and figure that out in the most natural way, without the technical elements and language and all these things that go into the process of filmmaking, without that getting in the way, right? How does that become a tool? Because I think at first it can be daunting, and you go, oh, like, I'm going from different sides of my brain, going from I'm a storyteller to, oh, I'm figuring out how to, like, put people in the scene, where to point lights, how to block, what is the 180-degree rule, all these things, well, the rule of thirds, the basics of cinematography, that can be a different language from the language of storytelling. But ultimately, they're all benefiting each other, and even if they are slightly different languages, I think they are. But they do all complement each other, and the more that you practice filmmaking, the more it all bleeds together, and you realize that, yeah, like, just a part of storytelling, there's different ways to help tell your story. And I think as you grow in your level of craft, part of leveling up is all of that just becoming more natural for the expression of your projects. But I think I'm going to wrap up the video, y'all. Thank you all so much for watching and listening to this, listening to me talk and ramble about filmmaking. Hope y'all have enjoyed this behind the scenes look at the process of storyboarding. I will see you all in the next video. So without further ado, I'll let you go. See you then.